Well, week before last, had an opportunity along with my colleagues Victor and Joanne to attend the Next Church Conference in Kansas City. And at the Next Church Conference, you hear a sharing of many ideas from a mostly Presbyterian gathering, mostly a little bit younger than what you see in many Presbyterian churches, sharing ideas about the direction of the church. And while you hear some interesting ways that worship is done a little bit differently. There are new churches in which communion is not just a piece of bread or a wafer, but an entire meal. And people gather together for an entire meal. There are churches that gather around dog parks. There are churches that do things differently than what we may normally, but they gather in the name of Christ, and so it is a church. But one of the themes that flowed through the entire conference was the need for existing churches, especially, to listen to people who say they are spiritual but not religious, to listen to people who would not typically sit in church pews, to listen to young people who are trying to understand how to navigate and coexist with people of all different religions and all different political views and bring peace to our world, to listen. And after doing all of that listening for many days, many of us were a little bit parched, and so we found our way to the hotel bar. And Victor and I represented Calvary for research purposes, of course, while Joanne, who is expecting her second little one, was praying for us safely from a distance. And Victor and I sat down in a rather large booth, and after a little while, this couple came and sat down beside us and immediately struck up a conversation, and the question that many pastors dread came up: what do you do? Why are you here? And it's often easier to tell someone that you are a cat herder or a long-term life insurance salesman or a life coach or just about anything other than telling them that, yes, I am a pastor. So Victor and I decided to tell them the truth, that he is a country singer and I play the banjo, and we did in fact confess that we were pastors. And the woman Felicia and her husband Jay started sharing, and once they found out we were pastors, Felicia said, well, I love the Lord. I am a Christian too. And she started to share about how meaningful her faith is to her. And she started to share, and you could see Jay getting a little bit more uncomfortable as she did, as she started to say that we live in a very nice home, we have very nice cars, we have successful careers, we buy anything we want, but we feel a little bit hollow. And so at this point, the server came over and brought Jay his bourbon and brought Felicia her martini, and she said that as they feel these feelings of hollowness, that they end up drinking more than they should, and they end up arguing more than they should. And she started confessing, and you could just see Jay kind of recoiling a little bit as she was sharing with these two San Francisco pastors who were sitting with them in Kansas City. And in what felt like a God thing, Victor had someone dear to him who had recently started a spiritual direction practice in Kansas City. And for those who are newer to all of this church business, a spiritual director is not a replacement for a psychotherapist or other counselors, but is somebody who helps one explore their connection to God. Sometimes at matters of forgiveness, sometimes matters of purpose, but really focusing on where is God in your life? Where are you sensing the divine? And Victor was able to refer Felicia to see a spiritual director and seek some deeper feelings and deeper sense of the divine in her life than she currently had. But if we are to look at what society and advertisers tell us, buying all the things, having access to whatever we want should make us happy. And that's the message that flows day in, day out, with which we are inundated. Now, we may not make gods, lowercase g, gods intentionally, but so often we do end up engaging in forms of idolatry, of making gods other than God for ourselves. And in today's scripture lesson from Ephesus, this was at the heart of the story. See, Ephesus, in what would be modern-day Turkey, had a god named Artemis, So Artemis, you could buy a little silver statue, and she was very important. She was the goddess of the hunt. She was the goddess of weather. She would influence whether you had a bumper crop and whether you made the money that you needed to gain position in society. She was a very important goddess. And when Paul, who came in and established a church at Ephesus, arrived, and people started to follow the way. The way was one of the early names before Christian was ever used for following Jesus. As more people followed the way, fewer of them worshiped these other gods, and fewer of them purchased these little silver statues. And if you look in another book of the Bible, in Acts 19, you can see that this move away from Artemis and away from other gods actually caused a riot. If you were a silversmith, Paul and his people were taking away your livelihood. So there was this shift going on between following uppercase G, God, and all of these gods that people wanted to buy and make and hold on to for themselves, much as the Israelites with the golden calf. People are always wanting to make gods that we can touch and hold and feel, and then wonder why we feel a little bit hollow. We wonder where God is calling us and how this sort of fulfillment comes. Now, this past week, the World Happiness Report came out. This is now the fifth annual World Happiness Report. Many people do different indices of world happiness, and some of you may already know this, but the United States did not crack the top 10. We're number 14. You want to chant with me? We're number 14. So Denmark and Finland were number 1. Canada was 7. Tragically, heartbreaking, Syria was at the very bottom, and many war-torn and poverty-stricken nations are at the bottom of this list. But the researchers, through looking at what generally makes people happy and content, and whatever their country may be, said that they see the U.S. as a breeding ground for seeking happiness in all the wrong places. These are their words, seeking happiness in all the wrong places. And they specifically point to the disparity between those who have much and those who have little, and the growing disparity, and the brewing animosity that is coming as a result of that. So this ranking and this sense of happiness and focus and where are we actually looking as our true north has an impact on our well-being. So what do we do with these feelings? What do we do when the world tells us to look inward, to be about ourselves? And you can see even through research that focusing on something beyond oneself will oftentimes actually make you live longer. There are studies, and I intentionally cite this at least a couple times a year, at the difference between one who is on the hedonic treadmill. So think hedonism. The hedonic treadmill is a term on which one is devoted to getting the things, to consumerism, to seeking that which will make you happy that can be purchased. Now, the eudaimonic, think EU, euphoria, looking beyond oneself, serving God or serving something beyond oneself, tends to bring one at the cellular level to have an immune system that functions at a better level. I just heard a report that in the most recent AARP magazine that people find that those who attend church live 4 to 6 years longer. So I cannot promise that you will live 4 to 6 years longer, but I think AARP is a reputable source, and so we'll go with that. And it isn't just that there's a magic formula. It isn't that the waters of baptism are magic or that the prayers are magic, but coming together in community and looking to one who is beyond us, seeking to follow one who is beyond us, does good things for our spiritual and physical health. Now, for us, this sense of being able to buy, to B-U-Y the light. Think for yourself, is there something right now, if you just thought if one thing were different, if you had a different relationship, a different job, a different car, a different apartment, if you had different countertops in your kitchen, something, then you would be happy. Now, you don't have to raise your hands, but most of us have a sense that if we could just change one or two things, or maybe we have some magic number or a finish line. And so many, I've now lost track of how many of you have told me that you have a number in mind. You have a number, and if you could reach that point, then you would stop doing what you are doing. You would stop traveling so much for work. You find your job meaningful, but you don't necessarily love it. So many people among you, regardless of your age, have some magic number at which you would feel secure. Now, some people have come back and admitted that when they reached their number, they didn't feel how they thought they would feel. See, this happiness index stuff, most of us have a baseline level of happiness, and at a certain income level, we're going to feel about the same. It cannot be fixed with money. It cannot be fixed with possessions. Now, some of us think we would be happier if we were surrounded by more like-minded people. If we could just be surrounded by more like-minded people. And so we create gods of a different sort. We create gods of our political views, of our own religious views. We listen to news sources that back up what we believe, and we end up in echo chambers that really aren't all that healthy because they don't represent the rest of the world. We seek happiness in ways that ultimately leave us feeling hollow when we neglect to follow. We think that we can buy the light. And in other cases, we function as though we have a bye, B-Y-E. Sometimes when a football team has won enough games, like unfortunately the New England Patriots, they usually get a first-round bye. They don't have to play the first week. Now, sometimes they get a little bit sloppy. Sometimes they get a little bit sloppy. And sometimes Christians are that way. We function saying that I believe in Jesus. I check that box. I go to church, at least Christmas and Easter. I check that box. I'm generally a good person, so therefore my ticket to heaven is punched. So I have a first-round bye through this life. I'll do some nice things occasionally here and there, but I really don't need to worry about what I do because God has my back. And while I certainly do believe that God has your back, I do believe that we are saved by grace through faith, that Jesus, the Christ, is the meaningful one who redeems us to God. Jesus did not only tell people to believe in him. He told them to follow him. When the disciples said that when they recognized this person of God, they had to then drop their nets. They had to then drop the other things they were doing and go and follow him. They could not purchase the light. They did not have a free pass. They had to go and live by the light, B-Y the light. They had to follow it in ways that brought great sacrifice and inconvenience. And living in that way, the last verse of our passage today says, sleepers awake, sleepers wake. Jesus was sending a wake-up call to his disciples, and he sends a wake-up call to us here today. But receiving that wake-up call, trying to live by the light and reflect the light of Christ can be a very dangerous proposition. At the end of the next church conference, a woman stood up to share her testimony, and she began by saying, I'm often asked, how did a girl like you end up in a trailer park? How did a girl like you end up in a trailer park? Well, she went on to share that this woman and her husband were very affluent, that she was an actress and a model in Southern California. Her husband was a successful attorney, and they bought whatever they wanted. They were surrounded by nice things. They had what by all worldly measures should have made them happy, but they did not feel happy. And over time, they began to abuse alcohol and drugs, and things got volatile. And this woman, Tamara, shared that there was one night when she was sitting in her very nice room, looking around at all of her very nice things, and she could have this feeling. She could hear this voice that said, Tamara, this is not what I created you for. This is not what I created you for. Now, we can analyze what she was hearing or what that actually was, but she had this sense of conviction that this was not what she was created for. And she said she responded in prayer, I want to know what I was created for. I want to know, why am I here? What am I supposed to do? And this then led her on a path where she says she blew the dust off of her Bible that she had not looked at for a very long time. She found her way into an accountability group and met people at a church. And she discerned that for her, the call was to go to seminary and become a pastor. Now, she had some resistance from her husband. Her husband said, Tamara, if you cannot be the woman that I married, then we are through. Then you need to leave. she had to make a very difficult decision. And this is not a decision that I recommend for everyone. But she had to make a decision that for her, she needed to go in a different direction. Now, Tamara, going through seminary and wanting to become a minister, had what was a very unusual experience. I mean, we're all weirdos. I mean, all pastors are a little strange. I'm the first to admit that. But she said that as she was praying for guidance, she then had this vision of an RV, a recreational vehicle, which, okay. And she, over time and in conversation with other people she trusted, came to feel a sense of call. And again, we have this affluent woman who has lived a very nice life, who now feels called to start a ministry in trailer parks. So she had a custom-made trailer where she does counseling, she leads services. While there certainly are people who are in RV parks who are out there for recreation and fun, she meets a staggering number of people who have lost everything, who are starting over, who are dealing with depression and despair. And she has this ministry in the trailer park that is completely different than anything she ever would have expected. For Tamara, living by the light took her in a way she never would have imagined in her wildest dreams. Now, I'm sure some of you are a little scared right now, thinking, okay, well, if I open myself up, if I pray, God, show me your purpose. Show me what you're calling me. Am I going to end up in a trailer park? And for most of us, probably not. And it's easy to mock these sorts of things, but if you look throughout the Bible, if you look at Moses, if you look at Esther, if you look at Ruth, if you look at Phoebe, other people who you may not even hear about as much besides Jesus and Paul and Abraham, they are rarely called to convenience. Living by the light is almost never a call to convenience. It is a call to sacrifice. It is a call that brings great blessing, but it is a call that can be downright scary depending upon where it is. So I invite you to pray. I invite you to pray now and to consider, to think about your home, to think about your neighbors, to think about people in cubicles or offices near you, to think about people in your pews. And I know some of you here today already have a sense of what your call is. You've probably had it for a very long time, and you are scared by it. Some of you are drifting and wondering and seeking to have the question of thy will be done, a sense of God's call for you to be answered in a way that it has not before. And if you do want a conversation partner, Victor or Joanne or I or any of our deacons or elders would be honored to be in conversation with you. But I invite you now to close your eyes. Let us pray together. Gracious and loving God, we want to live by the light. God, please show us your purpose and give us the strength and courage to live into it.